Welcome to 30 Minutes of Faith. We're very happy to have Bishop Jaime Soto from the Diocese of Sacramento with us. Thank you for joining us.
John, it's a pleasure to be with you.
Glad that you would make the time in your busy schedule. Can you tell us where you were born and raised and went to high school and grew up and about your family and all of those things?
Well, as I tell folks all the time, I'm from Southern California, which some here in Northern California would just consider that a whole different state.
Yes.
But I was born in LA, and just actually a few months after I was born, my parents bought their first home, their only home, in Orange County, in the city of Stanton. And so that's where I was raised, along with my 5 brothers and 1 sister. We're a family of 7, and I'm the oldest of 7. And I like to say that I was kind of raised in a Catholic ghetto, and in the sense that we really only hung around with our family and our fellow parishioners, and so that was. I grew up in an environment that was tied into family and into faith, and it was both of my parents are very devout Catholics and worked hard at communicating that to us. And I had the benefit of we all had the benefit of going to Catholic parochial school. And I had the benefit of going to Catholic high school, and then after that entered the seminary. And so I was really very much imbued with the faith, not just in the sense of learning the doctrines of the faith and studying the Baltimore Catechism, which Catholics of my generation and older will remember that. But more than that, my parents, and because of that, my family, there was a religious rhythm to the way that we lived. And so religious holidays, even family occasions, there was usually some kind of religious theme to that, whether it was a baptism, a first communion, a wedding, funerals. So this was, everything was very permeated with the Catholic faith and traditions, but at the heart of that was always, particularly with my father, was following the Lord Jesus. A really strong devotion for my father was the Sacred Heart of Jesus, the loving heart of Christ, and you walk into the family home, the Soto family home, and the first thing you saw on the wall was a portrait of the Sacred Heart of Jesus.
Now, you'd mentioned to me earlier your father has passed away, for which
Yes.
we're sorry to hear.
Yeah.
Your mother's still alive, and I noticed when you didn't say Los Angeles, you said Los Angeles, which I like. I happen to like that a lot. But your mother's still alive, and your brothers and sisters are still living?
Yeah. My mother still lives in the same home, and thanks be to God, she's doing well. She's getting older. And then most of my siblings actually live right around my mother's house, which is
cool.
A great blessing for her. And when I go down to visit my mother, that's always an occasion for everybody to come together, and it's nice to see the tribe get together. I have one brother who lives in Idaho, and he does come down occasionally, but it's a little bit more of a hike.
Well, she's probably just thrilled beyond emotion to have a son who is a bishop in the Catholic Church.
Well, I think that both my parents were just kind of thrilled and overwhelmed by the whole idea of having a son who was a bishop in the church. But I think my mother is very proud and very excited, and then she's also very worried. She knows that it's a tough job, and it makes a lot of demands, and so she's always, when I speak to her every night, and so she's always fretting about one thing or another. If I cough,
that's what mothers do.
Yeah, if I cough, she thinks I'm sick, and if I yawn, I need to go to bed, and so it's always she's always giving motherly prescriptions over the phone.
Now, was she here in town when you were installed?
She was.
I was at that event,
Yeah.
and I was just thinking as you were talking, I think I remember either she was introduced to me or she was introduced
okay,
publicly
yeah,
or
yeah.
something. That was sweet.
Well, it was when I came to Sacramento was when both my parents were here. You know, unfortunately, a year later, when I was in a certain sense took over after Bishop Wiggins' retirement, and we had a ceremony on that occasion. My parents could not come up at that time because that's just when my father was really in his last remaining days. But they were here when I'm fairly sure you were there when I was welcomed here to
Yes.
Sacramento, and there was and that was a great occasion for them. Wore them out completely. So.
Now, what were you doing before you came to Sacramento?
Well, as I said, I grew up in Southern California, in Orange County specifically, and Orange County is as many folks know, besides being the home of Disneyland, is quite an urban center, and so at the time that I was there, it was probably about 2.7, 2.8 million people just in one very small coastal county in California. And the diocese that for which I worked for many years is just that county. So it's in some sense it's very geographically small, but just dense with population. Most of my work as a priest, I was ordained in 1982. Most of my work has been with the Hispanic community, and I had the opportunity to study, get a degree in social work. And I did a lot of work in the area of immigration services. And that has been something that I did as a young priest, working with immigrant communities to try to help them to get not only legal status, but then later on to how to become citizens. But also now, even as a bishop, I still continue to work on that issue. So.
Did you speak Spanish as a child?
I did not. My parents, now this is going back to the 50s and 60s, and even though the Hispanic community would have been, even at that time, a significant population in California, yes. But it was relatively small. And so my parents were concerned that they wanted us to be able to speak English well, so that they spoke English to us, and then they spoke Spanish among themselves. Oh. And then my grandparents only spoke Spanish, and so I guess it was one regret about that, and I think my parents very much had regrets about this, is that most of us growing up did not have any, how should I say, extended conversations with our grandparents, because it was almost, we just really didn't have the ability to do that, and so most of those conversations were, how should I say, translated by my parents back to us. Though, my grandparents were very good to us and very affectionate, and I have fond memories of them. But I don't have those recollections of, certain sense, kind of sitting down and listening to my grandfather tell stories about coming to the United States. But in any case, when I was in the seminary was when I realized, well, with a name like Jaime Soto, and by that time the Hispanic population was booming in California, right. The 70s and the 80s, and I knew that I was going to, as a priest, wind up working with that population a lot. So I said I better get my act together, and so I started studying Spanish in the seminary. And then had the opportunity to actually go to Mexico, kind of an immersion experience, which was just a tremendous, tremendous experience in the state of Jalisco. But I'll be frank that even though I acquired a lot in school, it wasn't until I was finally ordained and quite frankly just kind of
thrown into the fire,
thrown into the deep end of the pool and had to swim, that I began to pick up the language at first rather clumsily, but bit by bit. As I would say today, I can defend myself in Spanish pretty well.
You know, when you talked about your grandparents being affectionate, my paternal grandfather kissed me on the lips from the time I was a little boy.
Yeah.
When we'd go to say goodbye and that. And the last time I saw him, I was a grown adult, and he was taking me to the airport to head back home, and he, you know, kissed me on the lips and hugged me and told me how much he loved me and that he was proud of me and all those other things. And that is just a powerful memory in my heart that just sort of screams at me, Grandpa loved me, you know, that was a sweet thing. So when you said that, it made my mind and my heart race.
Well,
back.
you know, they were such formidable figures. I mean, in many cases, I mean,
Well said.
that they were, you know, you know, as an adult, I mean, I realized that they were just working class men and people, and my maternal grandfather was a carpenter. My paternal grandfather was mostly in retail, but you know, in a certain sense, there was just such you know, admiration for them and respect for them. That was, I mean, they were just giants.
Do you speak in Spanish to your mother?
I do actually. Yeah,
cool.
it's kind of funny because she likes to. Sometimes I think as she gets older, that the Spanish of her childhood becomes easier for her, and so that she, you know, will start off in English and then she'll slip into Spanish.
That's kind of sweet.
And then, you know, and I may be tired or something, and I try to get the conversation back into English, but she ain't going there. And so, you know, I have to kind of switch into that gear, and so we had this conversation. And that's, quite frankly, it's I don't know how else to describe it, but a sweet feeling to have that ability to be able to communicate with my mother in that way, you know, in kind of going back to what was for her, you know, her childhood language, and to be able to carry on a conversation with her.
And that's a sweet, childlike story.
Yeah.
To hear that. How old were you when you thought you might want to be a priest?
Oh gosh, I get you know, I just as a tangent on that, I visit all our Catholic high schools here in Sacramento, and at least once, if not twice or three times, I get this question. So this may sound somewhat rehearsed, but that's a decision or I guess a desire I expressed all the way in the second grade. I mean, it was really, again, we were in church a lot, and then when we were not, both my parents were very religious people, and so I can only there was an attraction for me to that. Now I was considered a rather, how should I say, restless child in the pew, and maybe the idea of, like, he was the only guy, the priest seemed the only one who had something to do, you know, maybe that was attractive to me. But from a very young age, that was just something that appealed to me. I felt drawn to that. And now as I grew older, there were, you know, obviously my ideas of the priesthood changed. And at times, you know, I thought, oh, maybe I could do this or maybe I could do that. I mean, I grew up in Southern California back in the 60s and 70s. And during that time, you know, the aerospace industry was just big. And so everybody, I mean, we all knew engineers or were related to engineers. And I think almost everybody had somebody who was involved in the aerospace industry back then. And, you know, could talk about, you know, the Apollo projects or the, you know, the Mercury projects, so that was, you know, that was really part of the air we breathed. And so I like a lot of, I think, adolescent boys, or was, you know, thinking about, you know, that, you know, the possibility of going into engineering or going into, you know, some kind of part of that industry that seemed to, you know, was kept growing. And but the other thing too was I don't know exactly where the bug came from, but I was also very fascinated with politics. I remember still being, even, maybe in 5th or 6th grade, and we were, I guess, maybe studying U.S. history, and of course, then and then paying attention to, the political ads, or I remember even watching. I mean, this will sound crazy now, but watching the conventions, the political party conventions, before the presidential elections, and having a certain fascination about the dynamics. And of course, back then, there were always riots going on, but there was this fascination with the political realm, and so I was also fascinated by that. But no matter, I would think about that. Well, maybe I could do this or that, but somehow the idea always came back to no. I think I want to be a priest. And so that was just kind of one of these childhood desires that carried me into adulthood.
Every little American boy at some point in time in 2nd or 5th grade could say, I want to grow up and be president of the United States.
Oh, yeah, sure.
That was going to be cool. When you talked about aerospace, the first 20 years of my adult life, I worked in aerospace, and we spent a lot of time at Space Command in Los Angeles, or North American Rockwell, or in Huntington Beach, McDonnell Douglas, building satellites and all those other things. And it was an exciting way of life. We were sort of competing with the Soviets, and it was going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But through it all, we want to maintain spirituality and decency and honor and all of those other things. So where did you go to seminary?
I went to St. John's in Camarillo, and Camarillo is just in Ventura County, just a little bit north of Los Angeles, and it was just a beautiful spot. Now, if you go to Camarillo today, it's just a sprawling, I shouldn't say just, but it's a sprawling suburb of Los Angeles. I mean, it's a long distance from LA, but as people pushed out further and further looking for affordable homes, they pushed all the way out there. And this is, the Camarillo and Oxnard just sat in this just beautiful coastal basin, and the mountains, mountain range kind of came down into this beautiful coastal basin, and it was rich. What's left of agriculture still in that area, it's just very very verdant and abundant. But when I went to school, it really still was, a farm town. Camarillo was this farm town, and and the seminary was kind of on the outskirts of town, and it was actually rather isolated. It was kind of the idea at the time was that formation for the priesthood should be in some kind of solitary or quiet area, and so there we were in Camarillo with cattle on one side.
Off to the boonies.
Yeah, cattle on one side, and if the wind blew the wrong way, you knew they were there. And then orange groves around the campus, and there was this is back in the days when, and I don't know if they still do that, but they used eucalyptus trees to to kind of form a windbreaker around the trees. So I was there for 8 years. 4 years college, 4 years theology. And it was just it was a privilege. It really was a blessing to be able to have that 8 years of study, prayer, reflection as a young adult. That quite frankly, few young adults have that opportunity to really give themselves to those kinds of activities. And I don't have any sense of that time being deprived. We really were taken care of, and it was those experiences of being in the seminary, and many of the things I learned in terms of prayer and study were things that still stick with me today.
Is that seminary still there and functioning?
It is. Unfortunately, that the it used to be a much bigger campus. It had a college campus and a theology campus. And for a lot of different reasons, the Archdiocese of Los Angeles closed the college campus.
Wow.
But they still have the theology campus, which is, I could say probably was the older and the more picturesque part of the. It was kind of a like most things, Southern California, mission / Gothic, style, and a beautiful campus. And then at the time, surrounded by orange trees, and some of that has gone now, and so now there actually are housing tracts that butt up against the seminary property, which I understand that, but it is kind of unfortunate because again we were just really out all alone in this part.
Do you have, with other people who went to seminary, a sort of alumni feel the way we do with our high schools and our colleges?
Oh, no, in fact, actually, the seminarians here in Sacramento are accustomed to me saying that the presbyterate that you will belong to starts here in the seminary.
Oh.
That there is that sense of fraternity among the priests that, and what gives it some of its vigor is that some of those really very important and strong relationships start in the seminary, and so for me it's important for seminarians to not just be in a good seminary, but it's also important for them to be together, and that they as they grow in their vocation and they grow in their faith, that they also grow in a sense of companionship, both as disciples, and then hopefully, with God's grace, as ministers.
Do you remember the priest or priests from your childhood?
I remember some of them, and obviously, I remember the pastor when we were growing up was Monsignor Daniel McLaughlin, and he could be rather somewhat of a curmudgeon, and but I kind of, I guess there was a certain fear of God about serving with him, and yet there was also kind of the challenge because he was kind of demanding and a rather precise in what he expected. And I was an altar server. I mean, that was kind of, as a given, and I didn't mind serving with him, and I thought I had knew the rituals pretty well, and he was pretty exacting, and so there was in a certain sense a satisfaction with taking on the challenge of serving with Monsignor Daniel McLaughlin, and that he would be and that he wouldn't say anything at the end of the mass, because that meant you did it right.
I haven't heard that before. That's a good way to do that. When I went to boot camp for Vietnam in early 1968, my bunkmate was a boy from Lake Charles, Louisiana, and he was born and raised in a very Catholic home and a long line. His grandparents and great-grandparents that had been Catholic. And he was, we went to just a non-denominational chapel service on Sunday, right. And it was Christian. We heard the old Christian hymns, and the prayers and things were offered, and the Eucharist was provided and all that. But it was a whole mix of kids.
Right.
All these boys are 18 years old, and they're all worried about going off to the jungles of South Vietnam and that. Oh. And at night, a few of us, when the lights would go off, would pray. But he was a top bunk and I was a bottom bunk, and so I could just slip onto the floor, and he couldn't quite do that. And he would say to me, if you're going to pray, remember my grandmother, and remember, da-da-da-da-da.
Oh, that's great.
Sort of took requests on
right.
who I would pray for.
Yeah.
And he and I spent a lot of time together in 7 weeks, because we had to cover each other's back and all those things, and we spent a lot of time talking God and religion and all of that. And I came to love and understand what a fine Catholic boy he was, and what a good upbringing he'd had, and he loved a couple of the priests. He was born and raised in the Boston area, and he had a priest that had been there a good lot of years, and he just loved the man, thought the man could could nearly walk on water. You know, he just loved him to death. And I grew to appreciate that. I felt like I knew that priest a little bit by the time we got shipped out and shipped off. Well, how are things in Sacramento with the diocese? And,
well, you know, Sacramento is a very dynamic place, and I guess without making too many comparisons, you know, again, I came from Orange, which was very small and very dense, and here in Sacramento, instead of just a one county diocese, now this is a 20 county diocese with a population that's probably comparable to that, but then spread over 20 counties. But I find it it's a fascinating environment and with a lot of challenges. One of them specifically is just the proximity to the state capitol, and that is
Yes.
just it is the issues where faith and politics kind of rub up against each other, and sometimes they rub in the wrong way. It's for a pastor wanting to try to look for the ways of how we bring the word into the world. I think this is I do like that challenge of how do we bring the prophetic voice into the state capitol. At the same time, then we have these the whole Sacramento Valley and the challenges of farm towns dealing with the drought right now.
you use your Spanish in this diocese, I'll bet.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Just this weekend, I have 3 confirmations, and one of them will be in English, but the other 2 will be bilingual, and in mostly Hispanic communities. So and that's enjoyable. That's enjoyable too.
As we draw to an end, may I ask you if you could wave a magic wand to fix or repair or replace or update something in the world, what would that be?
One thing that growing up that was important to us was the family meal. And I'm aware today a lot of families do not do that. So if I had to say there was one thing, is bringing the family together around the table.
That's a good answer.
And saying grace.
We just had that conversation in our home with some grandkids and that just a few days ago. Good answer. Thank you, Bishop.
Oh.
Nice to spend some time with you.
No, it's great.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, John.
You bet.